Hello. Welcome to this podcast to reflect on International Women's Day and my own journey, which has included raising my daughter, now aged 7. I have explored the topic of how fostering inclusive friendships is crucial for the growth and empowerment of girls. And the title of this podcast really is how to deal with exclusivity in relationships at an early age, and kind of set the framework for more inclusive relationships with our peers, which can develop into a lifetime journey of peer mentoring and networking to just enhance our living experience as women and beyond in this world. So my daughter is at an age where she is discovering friendship dynamics, in particular what it means to have a special or a best friend. And whilst it's entirely normal to gravitate towards others and be drawn to some people more than others, exclusivity within friendships can often create barriers and perpetuate feelings of isolation. And also thinking about this from the perspective of a child and looking at it from another angle, exploring the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child means that we can educate our children and young adults about how potentially divisive behaviour in friendships or in other contexts can impact their rights to be protected from harm, and their right to an education, because, as you may remember from your own experiences or have witnessed, it can be incredibly distracting, and it empowers children to advocate for themselves and others, and also make informed decisions about how they conduct their relationships for their well-being and safety, to help create a culture of respect, openness and trust within their school community and beyond. So I've been inspired really to look at strategies to overcome exclusivity in this context and promote inclusivity for girls, and to return to those values of empathy, communication, and to really encourage girls and other young people to celebrate diversity at an early age. Now, in adulthood, I've found particularly my female friendships to be enormously supportive and valuable as I've made the transition through my life, the early dynamics of kind of that school day exclusivity that can be quite potent, and sometimes a sense of then it continuing into my teens and my 20s, maybe a competitive dynamic, jostling for position in educational environments, early careers, and then now I'm really in the middle of my life, I suppose, in a space where I value shared and different interests in the people that I'm connected with. Joy, kindness, fun, different opinions. These are all the hallmarks of the people that I'm truly connected with today. And particularly strong professional networks have been especially important for me in the last few years, and have led me to very valuable peer mentoring relationships, which have helped me to develop my skills in everything from time management to yoga. And this has all contributed to my overall well-being and I hope my professional performance too. So in times of change and transition in particular, I've found a phrase used by a professional contact and expert network facilitator in the legal community, Emma Bauer, at legal recruiter Harriet Brown, to be particularly valuable and especially true. Don't wait until you need a network to build one. And again, the founder of another powerful legal network and fellow lawyer, Leslie Wan, is a further example of the important role we can as individuals play in networks. So Leslie's been great at identifying opportunities for connecting others through peer knowledge sharing, practical events. And personally, I can find both contract drafting tips sitting comfortably alongside book recommendations for personal growth and development within those forums, and I'm really appreciative of that. So bringing that all back to this topic of tackling exclusivity in kind of childhood friendships, is there more we can do to encourage a sense of fellowship and connection at an earlier stage for girls in particular, to model how to raise each other up and extend that into the workplace and beyond? And on that theme of kind of development in earlier years, I've invited Rachel Vecht, founder of Educating Matters, which provides education advice, practical parenting tips and consultancy to individuals and organisations, to join me in discussing this topic on this podcast. And I first met Rachel in our collaboration on projects with the Insurance Families Network, which is part of the Inclusion at Lloyd's initiative, and is now a intersectional DEI network in its own right within the insurance market. And as both a subject matter expert and a mother of three daughters, I knew Rachel would be in a good position to share both professional expertise and her own personal experience on this topic. So, Rachel, first and foremost, where do we start with helping girls in particular to develop relationships which thrive on connection?
So before we dive into that, Mary, I do actually want to say how grateful I am to you for initiating this really important conversation, and also the way that you framed it and linked it with International Women's Day. So I'm actually a mother of 4 children, 3 of them are daughters, and I'm at a slightly different stage of the journey because my kids are older and I've supported them through secondary school and university. And I've also taught hundreds of other people's children. So I've observed a lot of friendship dynamics, and I've spoken to thousands of working parents about their concerns relating to friendships. And another thing that got me thinking is I'm actually turning 50 next week. So I have been in a deep zone of self-reflection, and especially thinking about my support network that enables me to reach this phase in my life. And I've decided to use my birthday as an opportunity to celebrate and appreciate those friends that I have from various stages of the journey, going back to, my oldest friend from nursery school through to school, university, and more recent friends. But back to your question, I think between us, we've kind of agreed to cover 5 main ways in which we can help girls to develop thriving friendships. So the first is around cultivating empathy. And empathy is the foundation of building inclusive friendships, encouraging girls to understand, appreciate the perspectives and experiences of others. By teaching empathy, we can help them to develop a genuine interest, embrace diversity, and break down those barriers that exclusivity creates. And it also helps to foster that sense of belonging, allowing girls to form connections based on understanding and compassion. And I am a huge advocate of EQ over IQ. I can tell you it works, having seen my kids go through the whole journey. And my favorite skill to teach parents is emotion coaching. That is how you nurture an emotionally intelligent child. And cultivating empathy actually begins with adults, whether that's parents, teachers, grandparents, showing up with empathy for children, especially during those challenging times when children are flooded with emotions such as anger, fear, anxiety, frustration. And by helping children to manage and articulate their emotions, letting them know you can never be wrong for having a feeling, and almost acting as an emotional container vessel for your child, so that they feel heard and understood. That is the most powerful impact adults can have. And this nurturing of empathy starts from a very young age. So even if you're just reading a book to a child or watching a movie, asking your child how they think the characters might be feeling. Or if you notice a child on the other side of the street crying, possibly a toddler, turning to your own child and saying, what do you think they could be upset about? There's a really brilliant book, which would be good for your daughter, called My Hidden Chimp by Dr. Steve Peters. And that helps children to understand how emotions and feelings drive behavior. And another good one is Dr. Dan Siegel. You can look up on YouTube his hand model of the brain. So children begin to understand that they don't need to take their friends' behavior too personally. They understand that all responses are triggered by an emotion that probably has nothing to do with them, but is much more about the person's behavior. And even in really challenging times, talking things through with your child, trying to understand someone else's perspective is really important. And to be honest, I know a lot of adults who still struggle with understanding and communicating emotions. So there's something about learning the vocabulary of emotions as well, so that our children can identify them in themselves or in others. And that enables them to be less reactive and more in control. So another great resource for this is Dr. Gloria Wilcox has something called the feelings wheel, which you can start consciously using that vocabulary of emotions. So that's like, I mean, I could talk all day on that, but that's the empathy piece. And the second element is around encouraging open communication. And this is absolutely vital to combat exclusivity within friendships. And in fact, you know, thinking about my work in culture and inclusion, and everything we're applying, you know, talking about applies equally to the workplace, but enabling girls to express their feelings and needs openly, to foster that safe space for dialogue, to promote, it can be called active or reflective listening, and respectful communication, is how girls can learn to navigate conflict, address exclusivity, and foster more of that environment of inclusivity and collaboration. Now, I learned a lot about the power of open communication during my time as a primary school teacher, and particularly the hundreds of hours that I spent on playground duty, observing the dynamics between children. So when I was a teacher, if ever an issue arose between two of my pupils, I took the approach of teaching conflict resolution. And I actually did the same with my own kids to nurture more sibling harmony. So rather than adults like coming in as judge and jury and apportioning blame and labeling one child as a victim and the other as the aggressor, and by the way, it's almost impossible to work out who started what, I used to try, and I still do this, to teach the skills of conflict resolution. And a very quick summary: basically, you as the adult, you state the issue. So I've seen we've got two kids, one wants this, one wants that, whatever, however you want to frame it. Then you ask each child in turn to express how they feel. You then invite them to repeat in their own words what they heard the other child say. And then finally, you ask them to come together with their own solution. And it's actually amazing how creative and good at problem solving children can be. When you give them that opportunity to take ownership, that builds up their confidence to openly communicate and solve issues themselves. And I want to highlight this by sharing a really personal example. So it's a couple of years ago, my youngest child was 12 at the time, and she was having a very challenging time at school. Basically, one of her friends was being, like, I'd say, overtly unkind, teasing, and excluding her. And this was creating a ripple effect of problems in her friendship group. I've actually noticed with my fourth child, she uses this term friendship group, which I don't really like. It's as if like they're in my group and you can't talk to anybody outside the group. So that doesn't sound too inclusive. But basically, the situation was that most days over the course of a few weeks, my daughter was coming home from school crying. So I just want to share how I handled it. So the first thing I did was I thanked her for having the courage to tell me what had been going on. And I kind of said, it's really good that you feel safe and that you can trust me. And then what I tried to do was really listen. And I actually noted down the date and what she was saying so that I gave it that proper importance. And I empathized. I strongly resisted my urge to tell her it would all be okay, or to make suggestions around how to solve it. And then when she was a bit calmer, I tried to explain to her that when you are hurt by someone, it's not about something you have done, but perhaps more about something that's going on with that person. And I tried to express to her this idea that while you can't control what anybody else says or does, you do get to choose how you respond. And then I said, how do you want me to help you? I offered to go and speak to the teacher. I even offered to speak to the child's mother, which I know is never a good idea. But she said, no, Mum, I've got this. I'm going to handle it myself. So we brainstormed some ideas, and she created her own plan of action around what to do and say at school. She then told the child who was being really unkind that they were not behaving how a friend should behave. So she was like openly communicating that. And she went on to say, we actually practiced this in a role play before she went into school, that if she then said to this friend, if that she continued to speak to her in that way, she was going to have to go and talk to one of the pastoral teachers, but she hoped that wouldn't be necessary because she didn't want to be a snitch. And then one particular day, the teasing on the coach ride home got really intense. And she came home and said, I just got up calmly and I said to this person, I don't need to be treated like this. And I walked off. And actually that day, an older child really stood up as an ally, had observed what was going on, and also spoke to the child. So in the end, after a very few difficult weeks, my daughter came home from school one Friday and she said, Mummy, I feel really strong. And I said, why? And she said, because I've had this difficult time and I've dealt with it myself. I was really open. I said how I feel, and I think it's all sorted. And so I thought that was just like a really beautiful story of how, the power of giving your children that strength to communicate openly. And I've seen even younger children do that. So I've done quite a lot of talking.
Yes. Rachel, I've just been sitting here enraptured by what you've shared, because, I'm just reflecting on two things that are really important. So I actually feel quite moved, because to hear that practical example of how your daughter went on that journey from, quite a painful place where I know, thinking back to my own childhood in the 80s, we were not encouraged to the emotion, that kind of emotional vocabulary in some of these strategies just were not readily accessible. Of course parents wanted to help their children deal with similar challenges that came up, but the fact that we're living in a world where we have resources and commentary on all of these types of issues, and how to make our children resourceful and resilient in an age appropriate way, and to just hear that very clear journey of how your daughter was able to feel empowered, going right back to what we said at the beginning of the podcast about the UN rights for children, to be protected from harm, and the right to an education, because as I said, these kind of problems can be incredibly distracting from that. And the kudos to you for giving your daughter the skills to, giving her the toolkit to pick up and develop her own skills and her own voice and her own strategy is really, really, really helpful practical example. So thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And something that I'm linking in with here as I move on to kind of the third point about encouraging inclusivity by celebrating diversity. You touched on allyship. An older child reached out and supported your daughter as an ally. Now, as I have learned as I've got older and reached a level of maturity in my own relationships with my friends, I can celebrate and embrace diversity. And you talked about friendship group and that kind of slightly tribal overtone that sometimes happens just because of the way that we're socially conditioned, I think, when it comes to school and school community friendships. And that's what I try and encourage my daughter Eva to explore and appreciate different cultures, backgrounds and interests. And a couple of kind of practical suggestions and examples around that could be looking at age appropriate books which could be helpful to recognize differences. Julian is a Mermaid. I don't know if you know that one. It's one that you can Google, which is about the journey of celebrating kind of gender diversity. And my daughter's school council has an inclusion representative, which I think is a great way of encouraging the kind of early allyship that you've touched on as well, Rachel, and recognition of impact of issues which may impact the lives of others but are beyond the realm of your immediate experience, and again encourage empathy. And in a similar, on a sort of a similar theme, there is literally a space at school my daughter goes to in particular, which is called a friendship bench, and that's in the playground, and it creates a safe area for girls to connect to, sort of physically, if they're feeling maybe left out, or and literally it kind of creates a space for compassion, I suppose, because and encourages compassion, and awareness, and that sense of allyship, because girls, particularly slightly older girls, are encouraged to look at the friendship branch, see if there's somebody on there who might like an invitation to chat and play, or an engage in an activity. And I think that also sort of sets a foundation for a supportive community, you know, and a girl's or a child's first experience of a community is school, really, outside of family home, and school. I think schools, families, and the wider sort of external community could work together to provide opportunities for girls in particular to connect and collaborate in different environments. So my daughter's really benefited from joining a local community choir, where she's had the chance to meet children who are outside of her school, and participate in an activity which is not based on individual performance, but about singing and having fun together. She's also mixing with children of different ages, and I can see how she kind of looks to the older girls to model singing styles and behaviour which she can then follow. And another initiative I'm aware of as well is this concept of positive playtime. Again, it's at my daughter's school, it centres on teaching the assistants setting up games and activities which involve teamwork, skipping games, treasure hunts, problem solving tasks, you know, and I think, again, going back to that idea of exclusivity, you know, sometimes, and I guess it's a normal thing, you know, girls are literally put outside in an external environment, or in it where there's unstructured time, and there can be a tendency to kind of congregate into kind of a tribal type setup where you've got groups and alliances, and that might not always be as helpful for mixing and integration. And in my own adult life, like many of us, I've engaged with different friendship groups in different parts of life, work and outside interests. And these have changed at various life stages, from sort of my trainee solicitor cohort when I was in my early professional life, through to the NCT childcare classes that I joined when I was, you know, pregnant with Eva, and parents I've met at school. And I often think about connections and friendships in a sense of being sometimes quite fluid and sometimes very grounding, so a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And you know, I've encouraged Eva to kind of keep an open mind, and while she, you know, when it comes to friendships, and nonetheless, and regardless of the path that any of my friendships take and develop, I've found developing those meaningful connections, friendships, to be very, very powerful, and supportive. So professional networking in particular has been useful for establishing links and even knowledge sharing, as I've already touched on. And one example of this has been access to a fabulous network of WhatsApp groups, bringing together sort of subject matter or industry focused legal experts in their field, you know, having an in-house counsel WhatsApp community that I'm a member of. And for me, without doubt, leveraging sort of technology and social media has served a very useful purpose for creating networks and community building, because in a way, you know, it means that even remotely in a busy world, and I mean, and in particular when we have the COVID crisis, you know, online webinars and events enable people to stay in touch. And however, I do still very much value face-to-face contact and being in the presence of others to really to feel kind of physically engaged with my friends and my friendships. So yeah, that's important to me.
That was literally the subject of my post this morning. because yesterday I had a webinar and then went to an in-person event and just talking about all the benefits of each. So I guess like the last element that we wanted to talk about was the importance of leading by example. And I always have this phrase, I say that about 80% of parenting is modeling, which is a bit of a terrifying thought. But we know that what we do is way more powerful than what we say. And adults play an absolutely crucial role in modeling inclusive behavior, whether that's parents, mentors, educators, leading by example to promote inclusivity in every relationship and interaction, and trying to model and demonstrate that value of diversity, empathy, open-mindedness can really foster and encourage and inspire girls to have a more inclusive approach to friendships and really create that ripple effect of positive change, empowering girls to break free from exclusivity and embrace inclusivity. And this modeling, for me, it includes really thinking about your daily interactions and decision-making for bias and acting with a conscious intent to be inclusive. It includes calling out inappropriate comments and behaviors and holding inappropriate conduct to account. So when you model that for your children, modeling self-regulation and responding with respect, even when you feel a bit triggered by the behavior and action of someone else. And in our family, there are a few specific values that my husband and I have always focused on and tried to model for our children. So every morning, when my kids were younger, my husband used to say each day to them, don't forget to smile. Even if someone isn't your friend, even if you don't know them, if you're passing someone in the street, when you smile, the world smiles back. And my mantra for my children was very much inspired by the poet Maya Angelou, who says, you know, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel. And if you ask any of my kids, they will tell you that verbatim. So whether you're talking to a spouse, a colleague, a friend, a shop assistant, a family member, how you show up determines how you make them feel. And everyday interactions provide a golden opportunity to be more open, empathetic, inclusive. And you have that choice in every interaction. Now, being realistic, very few people turn up in a totally positive way in every situation all of the time. That's not achievable. But the first step is that conscious awareness. And in our brains, we have mirror neurons, which means we mirror the emotions of those around us, especially those we are closest to. So every single one of us is impacting everyone we interact with day in and day out in both our personal lives and our work lives. And the way we impact people, like whether we're a manager who's tasked with engaging people to give their best effort, or we're a parent with the immense responsibility of giving the next generation the best possible start in life, that emotional intelligence is tremendously important. So just to kind of wrap things up and in conclusion, beating exclusivity in friendships for girls really is a collective effort. By cultivating empathy, encouraging open communication, celebrating diversity, fostering a supportive community, and leading by example, we really can empower girls to form meaningful, inclusive friendships. And together, we can break down barriers, promote connection, and hopefully create a world where every girl feels valued, accepted, and supported.
Rachel, many thanks for your contribution to this podcast. It's been, I've from everything you've talked about, particularly respect, treating others as you'd wish to be treated, and that fantastic Maya Angelou quote. And you've actually given me goosebumps because I've been thinking about that quote all morning. And it's incredible that we've brought all that in together, because how we make each other feel ultimately is very, very important for connection and a sense of well-being. And all of that, just leads to a better environment for the next generation. So I'd encourage any listeners interested in a collaboration on how we might support early networking skills for all genders to get in touch with comments and suggestions on LinkedIn or any other channels that you're connected to either Rachel or myself through. And with that, I'll just say another thank you to Rachel, and bye for now.
Thank you.